This video is going to be about speed wobbles or tank slappers or a death wobble. You've heard of, there's a bunch of different names for it. So whatever that is, when the handlebars start vibrating way more than normal and start going back and forth, and usually ends up in a crash. So a couple things to first keep in mind. Motorcycles naturally wiggle, right? So you're going down the road, you have the rubber tire that's trying to find traction on an uneven and bumpy pavement of the ground, so it's always going to wiggle a little bit, right? So it's just natural for it to do. But once it starts wiggling more and more, people get freaked out and they grip harder. When you grip the handlebars really hard, it makes that wobble even more violent. And like they try to prevent it from wobbling altogether. A lot of people try to do that. They try to grip so hard to not let it move because they don't think it's supposed to move. And that's what makes them grip even harder. Oh my God, it's wiggling. And then it's wiggling more. And now all of a sudden you're on a feedback loop. It's just wiggling more, gripping harder. The more the wiggle, the more the grip, and then you could go out of control. I've seen people damn near crash just because they're trying to prevent the bike from moving or wiggling at all. And it just made everything worse. So just keep that in mind. And naturally, when people that are in that state of mind, they're gripping and they're wobbling, they grip harder. Sometimes if the handlebars start going like this, it's pretty hard to keep a steady throttle while doing that, so they start to accelerate. And now they're whiskey throttling it, where you're pretty much keep on giving it gas, and it throws you back and your arms are locked out and you're just hanging on for the ride and you're accelerating faster and faster and faster. I've seen people do that teaching students at the very basic course. They just start going and then they get accelerated and it pulls their wrist back and they accelerate even more, and then all of a sudden they're going straight like this right into a fence. I've seen it happen right before my eyes while teaching brand new riders. I've also seen the speed wobble happen even at relatively lower speeds, like less than 30 miles per hour. And this is going to get into a couple of the reasons why, in my experience and knowledge, that I found to be the top probably 5 reasons this happened. One of the main reasons is people accelerate. If you accelerate very, very fast, it just unloads the weight of the front end, right? So if you accelerate, the whole front end of the bike, well, and the rear bike, the whole bike lifts off the ground, but there's a whole lot less weight on the front end of the tire. So if you're accelerating, the front tire is barely just skipping across the ground. So as you're accelerating, it starts to come back down and go back and forth. The tire might be out of alignment a little bit because maybe you turned or whatever while you're accelerating. So while it hits the rubber ground, it's going to try to find traction for a second and do a little dip. And as you keep on accelerating, and then you go back into the feedback loop. You're scared, you grip harder, you're accelerating faster, and there it goes again. Another big problem is maybe the wheels are just off. Maybe the alignment is just off. Maybe the bearings or the triple clamp, or there's something wrong with the suspension. That could be a big problem as well. If you ever get new tires, or if they're put on improperly or incorrectly by just whatever mechanic that don't really know what they're doing, that could be a problem. I've seen people come back from the mechanic getting new tires on, or they get some kind of maintenance done, and they're like, hey man, this bike is jacked up. I think my mechanic messed it up. Can you ride it around? I'm like, oh sure. We're in a parking lot. And I jump on the bike and I start going. I'm like, yeah, this thing is jacked up. I don't know what's wrong with it. I'm not a mechanic, but you need to bring this thing back and have them ride it again. I don't even know if they did ride it afterwards. And he was like, no, they didn't ride it, just to make sure. But they definitely, it's possible that people could just mess up. I mean, no one's perfect, so there's that. Number 3 reason that I've seen this happen a lot is low tire pressure. It was amazing to me to find out how many people do not check their tire pressure as often as they should. So I used to teach the Total Control Intermediate Riding Clinic on Coronado to a bunch of Navy guys and Marines 4 or 5 days a week. And the first thing we would do, one of the first things we would do after, within the first hour of classroom, once they got there and we do a couple things in the paperwork, we adjust their tire pressure. And we teach them in the classroom about tire pressure and why it's important, et cetera, et cetera. Then we actually go out on the bike and do it. And we check it and adjust it depending on what we're doing that day. And some people are like, oh, I don't know. I've got new tires 2 months ago and they must have set the pressure for me, so it must be good. And their tire pressure is supposed to be, say, 36, 42, like 36 in the front, 42 in the rear. And it's 20-20 or 10-20. There's been students, and I mean students, come into the intermediate riding clinic. These guys are military, Navy, Marines, Army, Air Force, whatever. And they could have been riding 10, 15, 20 years. Because they tell us during the beginning, during the introductions, oh, I've been running 15 years. Really, we go outside to his bike, his tire pressure is 20-20. So just because you've been riding a long time, that doesn't mean you actually know what you're doing. So tire pressure being really low can also cause that to happen. Because think about it, the lower the pressure, the bigger the contact patch. But if it's too low, that's a big, huge piece of rubber you're trying to turn on the ground, and it's just bad for a lot of reasons, right? And I already mentioned mechanical issues that could just be jacked up, or it could be something wrong with the suspension if something failed or broke inside, or if it's adjusted incorrectly, especially like the damping, or that could jack it up. And then if you load the bike up, so say you have saddlebags on one side or the other, or a lot of weight on the back, and it's just very unevenly distributed the weight, then that could cause it to do things a little bit more that would be less frequent if you loaded the bike properly. So what to do about it if your bike starts wiggling violently? So in my experience, this is what helped people, and what I've heard helped them when they actually get into a speed wobble, death wobble, tank slap, or whatever it is. So you don't want to pull in the clutch, you don't want to apply the brakes, and you don't want to chop the throttle. Okay, so what do? There's not many more options left. From my experience of what I have read and what I've learned and talking to people is, if you can, so you slowly roll off the throttle to not do anything crazy with the suspension, automatically load the front end if you chop the throttle, right? So you slowly start to slow the bike down. And keep in mind, if you're accelerating, then you're accelerating. But once you begin to roll off the throttle, you're engine braking. So some people have been commenting or telling me that engine braking is some special thing. It's just not on the gas. Whenever you're not accelerating, you're engine braking, unless you're keeping it steady. But if you're rolling off the throttle, you are engine braking. It's the same thing as taking your foot off the gas pedal. The car will start to slow down. So if you're slowly able to do that, the cool thing is, that would be the number one advice I would give to people, is slowly start to roll off the throttle and let the bike just allow itself to slow down. Now, the cool thing about bikes, they're made by really smart people, and the bike wants to self-correct itself. It'll do a bunch of really cool things. And you know this happens because if this is the front tire and this is the rear tire, if you do a rear tire skid and it starts to slide, the front tire will turn which way, left or right? If the rear tire starts to skid and kick out this way, the front tire will actually turn into it like this, because it's trying to self-correct itself. It's trying to help you out from preventing you from crashing. So the bike wants to correct itself, but we jack it up. We're the problem, right? So slowly roll off the throttle, let the bike come down in speed, and then stay loose on the handlebars. The bike's gonna naturally vibrate all the time, regardless of what kind of bike you have. It's gonna vibrate a little bit, right? Because you're just on the ground itself. No one's riding on marble. So it's gonna be vibrating, but if you death grip or grip really hard, it's just gonna make everything worse. Your riding technique, your stamina on the bike, everything's gonna be worse, especially if you're in this situation. Now, how are you able to have a loose grip, even if something crazy is going on, stay relaxed and roll off the throttle and not freak out? How are you able to do any of that stuff when something like this is happening? Well, I've said it before, I'm sure I'm going to say it again. You take a whole lot of courses to actually learn how to ride the bike, because please don't think the basic course, I don't care where in the world your basic course was or how long it was or what they had you do, it's still the basics. And you have to practice in order to get better at anything. It doesn't matter if you're an instructor. It doesn't matter if you have 1,000,000 miles under your belt. None of that means you're actually a good rider. So you need to continue to take courses. Nobody stops going to school after 8th grade education, right? You go to high school, associates, bachelor's, master's, PhD, right? That's like an 8th grade math student stopping school and thinking they know anything about something like astrophysics, or they could debate someone like Neil deGrasse Tyson. So why do people who only take the basic motorcycle course think they know everything? There's so much more to learn. You need to continue to learn. So that will keep you relaxed and understand the right technique of what to do and what not to do and how to improve by going through courses. If something does crazy happen like that, or if you just crash or something happens out of your control completely, I hope you're wearing full quality gear in case you do decide, if you hit the ground and you start sliding or tumbling, at least you're protected. And then keep the bike in a high state of maintenance. Get it checked out, make sure you do the oil changes, make sure every time you even get on the bike, do a quick once over. Just check the bike, make sure there's not anything loose or wiggling or something doesn't sound right, or if anything's leaking, that's a good indication to go check it out. There's no need to skip out on maintenance, or if you're doing your own work, well, make sure you actually know what you're doing. Or if you have a bike like my bike, the BMW, it's like a computer on wheels. You can't do anything like that unless you're like a BMW certified mechanic. You can't really do much to the bike. So bring the bike to the dealership often. Sometimes I just ride to the BMW dealership where I got my bike. I'm like, hey, this thing sounds weird. This doesn't work. I don't understand what this is. I smelled something funny on the bike. I don't know if I'm burning something up. Can you just look it over real quick? Most places, if you just roll into there without even without an appointment, there's someone knowledgeable about the bikes because you bought it from there. They're mechanics that could probably just take a look over real quick. You may have to wait a half hour or something to get somebody available, but most of the time in my experience, out of all the places I've bought all these different bikes I've had, no one has ever said, oh, make an appointment, call back, I'm not going to look at the bike. It's very rare that's going to happen. So there's my advice about death wobbles, speed wobbles, high speed wobble, tank slappers, whatever you want to call it. Accelerating way too fast, some kind of wheel alignment thing is off, low tire pressure, mechanical issues, suspension problems, or the load of the bike is wrong. So take a lot of courses to learn how to ride a bike, wear full quality gear, keep the bike in really good state of maintenance, check the bike every time you ride, just do a quick once over, it takes 20 seconds. And just understand the bike naturally wiggles, but your job is to stay loose, and if something happens, just try to roll off the throttle slowly to bring the bike down in speed without doing anything crazy. And of course, there's a million different situations. You're in traffic or non-traffic, if you're on the highway, if you're on an off-street, I got it. There's a lot of variables, and you cannot predict everything, but all you can do is invest in the software, right? Understand how to handle the bike in all different types of situations, and then practice a tremendous amount just in case something happens. You have a better understanding of what to do because you'll be more prepared versus less prepared. All right, everybody, thanks for watching. See you later.